CELA presents Summer Reading for Everyone. Make your library's club accessible for kids with disabilities.
Okay, welcome everyone to the webinar, Summer Reading for Everyone. Make your library's clubs accessible for kids with disabilities. My name is Denise Scott. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a program assistant with the Center for Equitable Library Access, or CELA. I am also a librarian for the Toronto Public Library, but today I'm here on behalf of CELA. And I just want to start off by thanking you all for joining us. We're always really, really excited to see libraries prioritizing accessibility. So it's great that you've joined us all today. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work in Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewas, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This territory is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and the land is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Now, wherever we find ourselves today across Turtle Island, we can be grateful to the First Nations for their careful stewardship of the land. So I've got a few goals for today's training. Our main goal really is to help you make your club inclusive and accessible throughout all stages of the planning process. So right from early planning to delivery to evaluations. And to do that, I'm going to talk about a few things, including the importance of incorporating accessible reading formats into your club, how to adapt different aspects of the club, things like book reports, giveaways, and more. And all throughout, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of practical tips, including towards the end, we'll do some craft and activity ideas that are accessible and easily adaptable. Now, before I begin, I want to start with a little anecdote that came to us from a parent that uses the Cambridge Public Library here in Ontario. So this parent said, my little girl has a disability and is embarrassed to read because she is in grade 4 with a grade 1 reading level. SRC has changed all of that to proud of reading. She even started reading in bed at night on her own with a flashlight. I cried tears of joy. And I include this anecdote just as a reminder that this is why we do this. It sounds kind of cheesy to say, but if you've made a difference in the life of one child, then that work you put in was worth it and that you've made a difference. So I'm going to start off with a little explanation about more about the organization that I work for, because we might be new to you. So the Center for Equitable Library Access, or CELA, is a national not-for-profit organization that provides access to reading materials for people with print disabilities. And one of the main ways we do that is through working with libraries. We are a bilingual organization, so our services are available in both French and English, and we do collect reading materials in both languages as well. We've got materials for people of all ages, including kids, everything from classics, award winners, to bestsellers, nonfiction, stuff for school assignments, Captain Underpants. We got all the good stuff. And this material is available in Braille, e-text, and audio formats. Now, who's eligible for CELA? So our service is a free service available to anyone in Canada with a print disability. And a print disability is a type of disability that impacts the way that someone reads. And that's typically the way that they read conventional sized physical print. And it can include types of learning disabilities, types of visual impairments or disabilities, as well as certain types of physical disabilities where the person's not able to comfortably hold a book or turn the pages. Now, the diagnosis or the identified need of the person is going to vary. And part of that is because there is no official diagnosis called a print disability. It's a term that's used in copyright law. So the person actually is diagnosed with something else, and then that diagnosis would fall under the legal definition of a print disability. But the person might also just not have a diagnosis. There's a variety of reasons for that. But they still might have reading needs that would be considered a print disability. So this is why access to the core of our collection, to our CELA collection, does not require proof of disability. You can self-identify to register. You don't need documentation. We do also provide access to a secondary collection. It's called Bookshare. It's an American collection, and their registration process does require that we ask for proof of disability to access specifically that collection. But that is only if the reader wants access to that secondary collection. There's still a ton of material that they can access without needing to provide any kind of documentation. The other cool thing is CELA is also available for free to professionals who work with people with print disabilities. So that is absolutely libraries, but it is also, excuse me, educators, teacher librarians, educational assistants, and other types of support workers, things like rehabilitation specialists. The vast majority of public libraries across Canada do have a CELA account. And that means that you can do things like order materials on behalf of your patrons to have them in branch, which is fantastic because it also means that you can do things like bring them into your programs. Bring a Braille book into Storytime, for example. Now, I've already mentioned print disabilities, but disability is, of course, a much broader category. It can include physical disabilities other than the types that impact someone's ability to read. It can include less immediately obvious disabilities, so things like mental health issues, chronic illness, or neurodivergence. And it can also include hearing-related disabilities. Though I do just want to add the caveat here that many deaf folks do not consider themselves disabled. Some do, some don't. Both viewpoints are equally valid, but it is important to recognize that distinction that some folks make. For today's purposes, I will be using the term disability to incorporate all of these types of accommodation and accessibility needs, including hearing-related ones. So I'm going to start getting into the planning stage of accessibility or of Summer Reading Club. And I want to begin by talking about the term born accessible. Now, a lot of you are probably already into the planning process, and I don't want you to panic. I am definitely not going to recommend that you start everything again. What I'm going to talk about is things that you can keep in mind as you're doing the planning process. And one of those things is the concept of born accessible. And what this means is that something is designed to be accessible from the outset rather than adapted after the fact. So a new building that is designed with ramp access and braille signage is called born accessible. But so is a book that is originally published in multiple formats with built-in accessibility features. And your summer reading clubs, they can and should be this way too. So I like to say that accessibility is proactive. So in this case, that means that you're thinking about the ways that you can incorporate accessibility into your planning right from the outset. You're not waiting until an accommodation request comes up. The great thing about this is that it reduces the chances of needing to kind of scramble to adapt on the fly. Yeah, unexpected things are absolutely going to pop up. That will happen. But if you've already laid a foundation and you're used to doing these kinds of adaptations, then it's going to be a lot easier if you're complete than if you were completely caught off guard. The other really, really important benefit of planning in advance is that it does genuinely foster a sense of inclusion and belonging for the kids and their families that benefit from those adaptations. Because now these folks don't necessarily have to ask for accommodations, they can just show up. The child doesn't necessarily have to feel singled out for needing something different. The parent doesn't have to worry about making a fuss or being told no. Everybody just gets to come and have fun. And I want to acknowledge that you're probably already doing accessibility, and you might not even realize it. So if you're including information on all of your programming promotions about who to contact in order to ask for accommodation requests, that's the first step to making that program more accessible. If you notice a child in your program that's becoming overwhelmed and you offer them a quiet space to take a break, that's accessibility too. So as I've said, incorporating accessibility is all about building on what you're already doing and then doing some modifications as needed. So planning for accessibility matters, but it also matters how you do that planning and where you get your information from. And my point here is talk to disabled people. And you've already started that by being here today and listening to me. Now, the disability rights movement uses the phrase, nothing about us without us, because too often we are left out of the conversations about things that directly affect us. And that does often mean the big things like government laws and policies, but it can also mean the simple everyday things like a library program. So try to avoid making assumptions about what someone might need or want. And maybe you've already got lots of experience working with disabled folks. Maybe you're disabled yourself. But if that's not you, then remember that disabled people know their needs best and consult them whenever possible as much as you can. It is okay and even encouraged to contact disability organizations to ask how your library can better support them. The important part is about being proactive about it. So reach out to them. Don't wait till they come to you because there's a good chance that they just won't. Same principle goes for online resources. If you're reading a blog post or browsing for program suggestions, look at whether or not the author is disabled themselves, or are they someone who has worked closely with disabled folks? Do they have the experience and the credentials to be giving out that kind of advice? But also look at whether or not the website is using outdated terminology, things like special needs or differently abled, or are there symbols that are often considered offensive, like the puzzle piece in relation to autism? Try as best as you can to know where you're getting your information from and get it from the source. So next up, I want to give a little overview of the accessibility features of the two main summer reading clubs in Canada. So for folks who are participating in the British Columbia SRC, the club does have an accessibility and inclusivity page right on their website that outlines things like adaptations for suggested activities, reading tracking options both online and in print, dyslexia considerations, and more. Every year, the BCSRC creates a recommended read list, and we at CELA create a secondary list where we take all of those titles And the ones that are in our collection in accessible formats, we compile into a secondary list. And then we make that reading list available both on our website and on the BCSRC website so that kids who can benefit from accessible formats can find them more easily. Now, my very favorite part about the BCSRC website is that right there on their homepage, they have a video. It's like a welcome video to the club, and it's in American Sign Language. And I love it for a couple reasons. The first is the fact that it is so front and center. It's not hidden on a subpage that's hard to find. It brings accessibility right to the front. The second thing I love about it is specifically the use of ASL and the focus on the inclusion of deaf and hard of hearing kids in the club. This is a really important one, and it often kind of gets forgotten when we think about reading accessibility. Um, but it's actually quite common for deaf children, particularly those with severe or profound hearing loss, to have lower literacy and vocabulary levels than their age peers. So having a video that so clearly shows that the club is for these kids too, is just really fantastic. Plus, the video has captions and a voiceover, so it's got other important accessibility features built into it. And I'm going to show a little clip of the video. I do want to apologize in advance. We know the audio is really quiet. That's a problem on our end with PowerPoint and Zoom. We couldn't kind of fix it. But the audio on the video of the video on the actual website is fine. But there are captions, as I said, so hopefully you will be able to follow along and get at least some sense of the video. So I'm going to pause it there. But what a great reminder right there at the end that there are many different types of reading, including in ASL. So moving on to the other main summer reading club, the big one across Canada, is the TD Summer Reading Club. Now, alongside the CNIB, we at CELA are the accessibility consultants for the club. So we do things like assess all of the major features and offer recommendations on how they can make the club as accessible as possible. And they do this in several ways. The first is the notebooks. So the print versions that you receive in your libraries and you hand out are intentionally designed with larger fonts and simpler layouts with more open space on the page. We also offer downloadable versions of the notebooks in e-text, audio, braille, and the open dyslexic font. The website also has resources for both parents and caregivers on the public side and for staff. The page on the staff site is called the Plan for Accessibility page, and it has a lot of practical tips on it. I really recommend checking it out. Even if your library doesn't participate in TDSRC, the webpage is publicly available and it's a really great source, sort of aggregated source for a lot of accessibility tips all in one place. TDSRC also creates audio versions of the original webcomic and the story walk that they do each year. And their artwork incorporates disability representation. So the image I've got up on the screen today is from the upcoming 2026 artwork. And it shows a smiling little cartoon toad who is wearing headphones and reading on a tablet. And I love it. I think it's adorable. So once you've started planning and are kind of ready with your programs, it's time to start doing promotions. And this means that all of your promotional material, things like flyers, calendars, etc., should be accessible. And that includes using clear fonts and uncluttered designs. It also means making sure that you include a description of how you're making your club or your program accessible. So, for example, the poster for movie night should explicitly say that you are putting the captions on. That way, someone that needs the captions doesn't have to ask. And also, again, make sure you're including contact information if someone has additional accommodation requests. Now, we don't have time today to go into all of the features of accessible promotions. I could do a whole presentation on that alone. But there are lots of great resources online to help you do things like graphic design and document creation. And I do have one quick social media tip for today. When you are using hashtags, please use what's called the camel case format. So this is still a normal hashtag, but instead of using all lowercase letters, you're starting each new word with a capital letter. And what this does is it helps screen reader technology be able to identify each individual word. And it actually does the same thing for readers who are reading by sight, but may have certain types of reading disabilities. So instead of just seeing a long line of jumbled lowercase letters, they're more easily able to pick out each word. And my example up here on the screen is simply hashtag summer reading club with a capital S in summer, a capital R in reading, and a capital C in club. Now, accessibility matters when you do outreach too, because if people don't know that you're making the club accessible, there's a pretty good chance that they're just not going to participate. So promote your club's accessibility features. Show the parents where the resources are. Show the kids the audio version of the webcomic. If you're going out to schools, take multiple types of reading formats with you. Remind the kids and their grown-ups, because often it's the grown-ups that are the problem, that audiobooks count and having an adult read to you counts. The newspaper counts. Talk about all of the accessible ways that kids can participate in the club. Even if you don't know or don't think someone might need accommodations, talk about them anyway. And do outreach that involves disabled people. So talk to your local rehab centers and parent groups and day programs and literacy support organizations. Show them how you're making the club accessible and explicitly let them know that their kids are welcome too. Because honestly, often they don't know that or they think they're not going to be welcome. So it's our job to tell them that they are. I also want to talk a little bit about the displays and decorations that you're putting up in your branches. I've got two main tips here. First, as you're hearing me say a lot today, is to promote multiple formats. So put a bunch of different formats in your displays. The image I've got here on the screen is an example of a children's book display that not only incorporates standard physical print picture books, but it also has CD format audiobooks and it has playaway devices. The other thing that this display has is a poster promoting CELA's children's services. And I'm going to include a link to that poster at the end of today's presentation. My other main tip is to keep things simple and try to avoid over decorating. If you put too many items onto your book display or you go really over the top decorating your bulletin boards, it can become very visually overwhelming, which is not only tough for folks with certain sensory issues, but it also makes it harder for people with lower vision to identify the important parts of those displays. Couple other quick tips for displays. Uh, be mindful that your materials are at a height that is accessible to wheelchair users. And if you're putting out anything like braille or tactile books on display, don't put them behind glass. I know they can be fragile and the sort of, you want to protect them and preserve them, but they're meant to be touched in order to be experienced. So try not to lock them up in a display case, for example. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about how to make your registration process more accessible. Biggest thing here is keep it simple. If you require the child's caregiver to fill out a form, keep it short and only ask for the important details. And really, that just might be the kid's first name and their age. Also, make sure you're offering the option for them to dictate the information to you rather than filling it out themselves, because not everyone's going to be as comfortable with reading and writing as they are speaking verbally. Remember too that having to approach a staff person to ask a question can be a barrier for some folks. So, as much as possible, try and make sure that your signage and your promotional information includes the details on where and how to sign up. And I also really encourage you to use visuals. So, some folks will process visual information more comfortably than text. And a lot of folks will feel more comfortable approaching a staff person to register if they already know how the process works. And remember that that isn't just an accommodation that's important for kids. It's also as useful to many of the adults that are coming with them as well. So the image I've got up here on the screen is kind of a generic example of how to provide that combined visual and text instructions for participating in an SRC. So we've got a simple black and white icon for each step, and then a short, simple sentence. So this version says, sign up at the circulation desk, get your notebook and stickers, read books in any format, tell us about what you read, and earn prizes. Also, as part of the registration process, make sure you are including accessibility information. So certainly that is asking if there's any accommodations that the child might need. But again, it's about promoting your collections and the resources. Anytime you explain the club, explaining how to participate, always include accessibility into your kind of little speech. And lastly is to consider offer seating. This is really important again if you are going to do a little sort of welcome introduction or you want someone to fill out a form. Not everyone can stand comfortably, even for short periods of time, and even if they were standing and walking when they approached your desk. So seating is a great option. All right. So your kids are registered. The next big thing that involves interaction with you is the book tracking and reporting. So here I want to remind everyone that not everyone reads at the same speed. One child may read one or two books over the summer, while another reads 10 or 12, but they both may have actually spent the same amount of time reading. So a fairly straightforward way to avoid unintentionally disadvantaging or discouraging kids is to track reading based on the time spent rather than on the number of books read. So if your library normally gives out a sticker every time a child reads a book, consider maybe giving out a sticker for every hour they read or every half hour instead. The great thing about tracking reading this way too is that it has the added benefit of like moving away from that idea of reading as some kind of competition or like a skill to be bragging about. The focus really should be on the quality of the reading experience, not on the quantity of books read. Again, as I've mentioned a few times, make sure when kids are doing book tracking and reporting, you recognize that they've read something other than a standard print book, so audiobooks, graphic novels, cookbook, etc. If your library has the capabilities, you can consider offering the option to submit book reports online or via email. Both TD and BCSRC have this as an option through their website if your library participates in their club. And this is a really important feature because coming into the library in person on a regular basis, or at all actually, might not be possible for some kids for a wide variety of reasons. But these kids might want to participate and they should have that option too. Last thing for book reporting is encourage the kids to submit book reports in a variety of ways. So the standard, of course, is to have the kid come up to your desk and answer a question or just talk a little bit about the book. Definitely still keep doing that. That is going to be the best option for some kids. But remember too that some kids may not communicate by speaking verbally. They may feel anxious about talking to you, or they just might not really have processed their thoughts about the book in a kind of coherent verbal way. So give them the option to draw a picture, make a collage, write out a few sentences. You can really kind of get creative with it and offer them those options. All right, so your kids have read their books, and now it's time to earn prizes. My tip here is to remember that your participants are going to have different levels of vision, mobility, and sensory processing. So keep that in mind when you are planning your prizes. And as much as possible, try to offer like a range of prizes so that the child has some choice. Couple things to think about. A child that reads exclusively with either ebooks or audiobooks probably won't enjoy a bookmark as much as other kids. They might choose it, and that's up to them. But it's probably not going to be as relevant to them as it would be if they read physical print. Also, if you're buying stickers, see if you can get ones that are puffy or fuzzy, different textures. Lots of different kids enjoy those. Also, metallic or really shiny ones can be great. Lots of kids who are blind or have low vision do have some working vision, so can often see things like bright contrasting colors or shiny metallic textures. So they'll enjoy those types of stickers more. For medium-sized prizes, your standard things like fidget toys, keychains, little kind of 3D objects or toys usually are fine. Bigger prizes, again, the sort of standards of t-shirts and water bottles are great. If your library does something that might be kind of considered like an experience-based prize, I know some libraries do things like give out gift certificates to a local attraction or a sort of an amusement place. If you're doing that kind of thing, again, take into consideration whether or not kids with different disabilities will be able to use that prize. And again, if you can, offer a few choices so that they can self-select what works for them. Next up, I want to quickly touch on accessible evaluations. Anytime you're asking for public feedback, try and keep your questions short and to the point. Offer print and online options for completing a survey. If you're doing anything with visuals, make sure you're also including enough text that someone could answer the question based solely on the text alone. And lastly, build in an accessibility specific question. You can ask things like, did you request accommodations? Did you feel that you got the support you needed? Was the program accessible to you? Something along those lines that kind of just opens up that opportunity for a participant to share what they thought that you did well, maybe not so well in regards to accessibility. That can be very, very valuable feedback. Okay, now the really fun stuff and the kind of the big stuff. We're going to get into programming, and I'm going to start by talking about some crafts. So CELA has an accessible crafts resource guide that is downloadable from our website, and it's full of all kinds of practical tips. I will include a link to that at the end of today's presentation. But for today's purposes, the biggest thing to remember is that in general, hands-on tactile activities are usually best. So crafts that are solely paper-based, for example, maybe you're gluing paper leaves onto cut out paper leaves onto a paper tree trunk, is not necessarily as accessible. But if you're incorporating materials of different sizes, shapes, and textures, you're making that more inclusive, certainly to kids who are blind or have low vision, but also mobility disabilities that might make manipulating paper kind of awkward or difficult. And absolutely, it's going to be more engaging to sensory seeking neurodivergent kids. If they're anything like me, they want to touch all of the different materials because it all feels interesting. And that makes that craft much more engaging. So my first craft suggestion is what I simply call tactile pictures. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Basically, you're just going to offer the participants a whole range of random craft materials. It's a great way to use up sort of leftover bits. And then you're encouraging them to make a picture based on a particular theme. So, for example, if you just read the Lorax, you can give them pom-poms and pipe cleaners, and they can make the Lorax trees. The second image that I have up here on the screen is from a program I did for kids from a CNIB camp. So they all had some form of vision loss. And we were making under the sea pictures. So we gave them things like sandpaper for the ocean floor, sequin fabric for fish scales, all kinds of fabric scraps, yarn, moss, etc. And they just went to it. My other craft suggestion here on the screen is for folks who want to be a little more environmentally friendly in their activities. We do know that some libraries are trying to move away from creating as much garbage as possible. So this craft is what I call compostable creations. Basically, you're going to use something like homemade Play-Doh or salt dough as the bodies for little monsters or creations. And then you use all kinds of things like rocks and twigs and dried leaves for all the body parts and different kind of accents. So that's what the example, the third image on the screen there is an example of one of those. And the dough does dry hard, so kids can take them home if they'd like. But if they leave them behind, or if the parent wants to get rid of it eventually, the nature bits can go back outside and the dough can go in the compost and nothing went in the garbage. You can also use this kind of dough to make things like fossils, which is the fourth image on the screen there, where we used a rubber dinosaur to make footprint impressions. And again, then you can use nature stuff to kind of make some accents on it. The great thing about these two different kinds of crafts that helps make them more accessible is the fact that they're really open-ended. So kids are able to choose to participate in a way that works best for them without necessarily having to ask for accommodations. They are also very tactile, so they can be done solely by touch for kids who are blind who have low vision. And they don't require a significant amount of hand strength or fine motor skills for kids with mobility disabilities. Plus, they're really, really super adaptable to different themes or whatever book that you're reading that day as well. So you can kind of tailor it to whatever your club is doing. Next up is story time. My first tip here is to offer fidget toys, headphones, and sunglasses. And actually, you can be doing this for any program, not just story time. It's a really simple thing that you can do that makes a huge difference for kids with sensory issues. And it can be done fairly inexpensively. You know, they can be cheap sunglasses, they can be dollar store fidget toys, old headphones that you cut the cords off of. Um, Important reminder though, do make sure you are cleaning and sanitizing everything after it's used. I do know of someone whose child got head lice from the headphones, and we don't want that to happen. Next up is choosing shorter stories and ones with big, bold illustrations. So here we want you to remember that some kids are going to have to work harder to focus on to focus and to listen. So a shorter story will give them a break sooner. And big, bold illustrations without a lot of tiny details or extra background clutter will be less visually overwhelming, and it will be easier for kids with low vision to identify the key elements of the illustrations. Third thing is a reminder that not everyone listens by sitting still. Some kids are going to want to wiggle and stim, walk around. That's okay. But it is also okay to politely redirect a child if they're becoming a significant disruption. So you can say something like, this spot here is for sitting, and that spot there is for walking. Where would you like to be? So you've given them a clear expectation, but you've also given them a choice. Lastly, I really encourage you to use a visual schedule. This is particularly helpful for neurodivergent kids, but also for folks who are hard of hearing, have developmental disabilities, etc. So very similar to what I was talking about during the registration process, but here instead it's listing the different parts of the program in the order that they will happen. So on the screen, I have an example with the text and the visuals for the Good Morning song, stories, toys, tidy up, and then the goodbye song. But also don't just rely on those visuals. Make sure you're talking about the schedule throughout your program. And I don't mean like read out an itinerary. Really, all you have to do is something simple like saying, we're going to read a story about fish, and then we'll sing a couple songs. Now everybody knows what to expect. And again, this is something you can and should be doing during any program, especially if you're getting towards the end of an activity or a transition moment. You can say something like, there's 5 minutes left in the craft, so start thinking about being finished. What this does is it gives kids with things like time blindness or difficulty at adapting to change the opportunity to process that upcoming change rather than it being an abrupt surprise. And that'll make those moments a little easier. Next up, I want to talk about large scale events. So this is launch parties, author talks, the magician, all sorts of external presenters. First is always, always, always use a microphone. Second is to book ASL interpreters as far in advance as possible if you know you're going to need one. They are in very high demand and can be hard to get on short notice, especially if you live somewhere rural or more remote. Third thing is to offer different types of seating for both kids and adults. So you might have carpet squares on the floor, but consider also putting out kid-sized chairs and adult chairs. Again, not everyone is going to be able to stand comfortably for a long time, nor can everyone comfortably sit on the floor. That's both kids and adults. Seating also has the added benefit of being a sort of visual cue to help kids better understand personal space. So this is my chair and that is your chair. And it helps them know what to expect when they enter a room. So if they come in and they're feeling a little unsure, they can see that there are seats so they know they come in and sit down. Next up is to make sure that you have ramp access to any sort of stage or elevated area. The kid who uses a wheelchair or a walker probably wants to be the magician's assistant just as much as any other child. And lastly, uh, try and make sure you have a quiet space nearby for people who need to take a break. My final type of program is STEM programs. A lot of these are great because they are already accessible or easily adaptable. Pretty much anything that involves measuring, pouring, and mixing can be a really great choice. So things like slime, salt dough, science experiments. Kids who are blind or have low vision will likely be learning to measure things using their finger to gauge the depth and the quantity so they can help with the pouring and the measuring. Kids who have limited dexterity or fine motor skills may still be able to hold a large spoon to stir as long as someone holds the bowl still. Uh, and lots of kids are going to be able to squish things with their hands. If a kid has sensory issues around messy materials, they don't want to touch the gooey stuff, you can offer them disposable gloves. That won't work for every child, but it is an option to consider that it can help some folks. Another great STEM activity are tactile maps. So instead of using a flat map and kind of cutting out little houses and gluing them on and that kind of thing, use 3D objects. So Monopoly houses, artificial leaves or trees to represent the different locations, something rough like sandpaper to be the road, and then maybe yarn or pipe cleaner if you're wanting to trace the route between different locations. And my third STEM suggestion is another environmentally friendly one. Basically, you use recycled materials to create structures, cities, inventions. This is a great one where it really emphasizes process over product. All you got to do is collect a whole bunch of cardboard boxes, tubes, other materials that are clean and safe to handle, and then give kids glue and tape, etc., and encourage them to make something based on whatever your theme is. So, make a pirate ship, make a city, make a futuristic invention. It's a great way to encourage creativity and imagination, engineering. If they decide to work together as a group, you've got cooperation going on. And at the end of the program, it can all go back in the recycling so you haven't made any new garbage. Before I wrap up, I want to remind everyone that each year TDSRC and CELA offers an accessibility award to a participating library that demonstrates dedication to incorporating accessibility into their program. It comes with a $2,000 cash prize, as well as travel expenses for someone from your library to travel and attend the award ceremony in person. And I really, really want to strongly encourage you all to apply. The image on the screen here is from the 2024 winners. This is staff at the Berks Falls, Armour, and Ryerson Union Public Library. They are a very tiny rural library system here in Ontario, and they were such a great example of a kind of small but mighty, where they did some really great adaptive things without much budget at all. And that's a great reminder too that, again, you're already doing accessibility and you might not know it. And B, it doesn't have to be big flashy things. It doesn't have to be a whole new renovation. Tell us about the book displays that you made and the outreach you did and the time you adapted a program for a child with cerebral palsy. All of those little moments build up, and we want to hear about them in your award application. So to wrap up, I want to talk about a few other ways that CELA can help support your summer reading club. And the main way is that we can provide access to books in accessible formats. And this is both digital and physical items. We really, really encourage you to talk about CELA services with your families. Lots of folks, both adults and kids, with things like neurodivergence and dyslexia and other learning disabilities don't realize that they're eligible for our services, but they can often really benefit from things like our accessible formats, the read-along books, like the image on the screen here is an example of Captain Underpants in a read-along version that has the audio and the text together. We also offer a ton of materials and resources on our website. I'm going to have some links to those in a moment. And lastly, earlier, I did mention the TDSRC Plan for Accessibility page. We are the folks behind that. That's us that wrote it. And so that is another way that we offer kind of go-to quick and sort of easily actionable tips that you can implement in your clubs. So I mentioned I would have some resources. This page here are some downloadable resource guides, including one all about accessible reading formats and the different types of reading needs that they can support, the craft guide that I mentioned earlier, and a guide for Storytime, as well as the child services poster that I mentioned. These are the links to the English versions, but all four of these are available in French versions through our website. And lastly, some web pages, including resources on our site. The BC and TDSRC accessibility pages are here, as is something called the Accessible Libraries.ca, which is a really fantastic curated and annotated database of accessibility resources on all kinds of topics related to libraries. So very, very worthwhile checking out. And with that, a huge thank you to all of you for coming out and letting me sort of info dump at you today. You are absolutely welcome and encouraged to reach out to me with questions. My contact info is up here on the screen. You can email me at denise.scott@celalibrary.ca. And with that, I will say thank you and have a good day.